The great obsidian throne of the galactic consensus stood empty for 107 standard cycles. The being who had occupied it, the Empress of 1,000,000 stars, had vanished at the zenith of her power after the last great unification war. In her absence, the vast bureaucracy she had built hummed on, governed by precepts and protocols, but the soul was gone. The memory of her, a figure of radiant light and profound, unsettling calm, faded into myth for the younger races. For the elders, it was a quiet, aching absence. On a forgotten orbital way station, circling a dull yellow star in an unremarkable spiral arm, a human named Eli tended his garden. The station, a relic of the pre-consensus era, was a patchwork of corroded metal and sighing life support systems. Eli had been there a long time. His face was leathered by recycled air and artificial light, his hands scarred from repairing ancient machinery, but his eyes were a clear, patient blue. He wore simple overalls and moved with the deliberate care of one who knows the value of every resource. He was watering the hydroponic tomatoes, a stubborn, Earth-origin cultivar he had kept alive for decades when the station's proximity alert chimed, a sound he had not heard in years. On the cracked screen of the command console, a ship resolved. It was not a trading scow or a lost scout. It was a Chrysalis-class pinnace, a personal vessel of the Imperial household, its hull a seamless pearl white that seemed to drink the starlight. It docked with a silence that felt intrusive against the station's constant groans. Eli did not rush. He finished watering the tomatoes, ensuring each root received its share. He placed the canister neatly on its shelf. Then, and only then, did he walk to the docking umbilical. The inner door hissed open. Light flooded the grimy corridor, not the harsh glare of station bulbs, but a warm, golden radiance. Within it stood the Empress. She was as he remembered, yet not. Her form was draped in a simple shift of shifting gray, and the corona of energy that once haloed her was subdued, almost dormant. The terrifying, beautiful intensity in her eyes had banked to an ember of profound weariness. She looked at the stained floor plates, the moss growing in a condensation leak, and finally at the human in his worn clothes. "You are still here," she said. Her voice was a melody, played on a forgotten instrument, softer than memory held. Eli nodded. The station required tending. A faint, almost imperceptible ripple passed over her features. All else has moved on. The court, the ministers, the worlds. They have built new myths in my absence. Yet you remain. I kept the agreement, Eli said simply. He turned and walked back into the heart of the station, not as a subject retreating, but as a host leading. After a moment, she followed. He led her to the garden dome, the station's one true point of pride. It was a jungle of earthly and alien flora coexisting in tangled harmony. Vines from Kythera intertwined with grapevines. Fragrant Zillion moss carpeted the soil around Terran potatoes. The air was moist and rich with the scent of green growth and blooming jasmine. In the center was a simple table and 2 chairs, fashioned from spare conduit and plating. She paused at the edge, her gaze traveling over the controlled wilderness. "You built this." "It was necessary," he replied, filling a kettle from a filtration unit. "Long cycles alone require a purpose, a thing to nurture. You did not think I would return." "I considered it a possibility." The agreement had no end date. The agreement. It was not written on any official document. It was spoken, a century and more ago, in the echoing silence of her throne room after the last battle. She, a being of immeasurable power, had seen the cost of finality in his human eyes. He, a minor diplomatic liaison whose entire world had narrowly avoided being a footnote in her campaign, had not begged for mercy. He had asked for reason. And in a moment of unprecedented grace, or perhaps immense fatigue, she had listened. His world was spared absorption, granted autonomous status. And as the court buzzed with the news, she had drawn him aside. "They will all change," she had said, her voice then like stars colliding. "They will either become sycophants, or rebels, or simply forget. You will not. How can you know that, your radiance?" He had asked, "Because you looked at me not as a god or a conqueror, but as a problem to be solved, a force of nature to be weathered. Your species has a singular talent for patience, for waiting out the storm. Wait for me. For what purpose? To remind me," she had said, and then faded from public view, and from all known space. Now, in the garden, she sat at the crude table. The chair creaked under her, a profoundly ordinary sound. Eli placed a mug of steeped tea before her chamomile from the dome. "Why this place?" she asked, gesturing to the rusting walls beyond the glass. It was neutral, unclaimed. It had a good view of the nebula, he said, sitting opposite her. And it needed someone. She sipped the tea, her eyes closed for a long moment. "It tastes of sunlight," she murmured. They sat in a silence that was not awkward but vast. The station's chronometer ticked over another hour. "I went to the edge," she said finally, her voice low, "where the universe unravels into the silent dark. I sought the source of the song that has driven my kind since our birth. I found only echoes. I learned that to hold 1,000,000 stars is to hold nothing at all. The power, it became noise. I dimmed myself to hear something else. But there was nothing to hear, only the silence of being absolute." Eli listened, his hands wrapped around his own mug. "I expected to return to a changed empire," she continued. "I did not expect to find a single, unchanged point within it." She looked at him, the ember in her eyes glowing slightly. "Why did you wait, human? You owed me nothing. Your world was safe. You could have had a life." "I did have a life," Eli said, looking around at his garden. "This is it. And I waited because you asked. And because a promise is a thread. It ties a thing down. It seemed to me that something as vast as you were might need a thread, however small, to find your way back." "A thread," she repeated. The word seemed alien on her tongue. Her people dealt in cosmic edicts and stellar decrees, not threads. "You said I was to remind you." "Of what?" She did not answer immediately. She watched a bumblebee, another Earth relic, drone lazily from flower to flower. "Of scale," she whispered. "Of smallness. I became lost in the infinite. You have always been rooted in the finite. A single plant, a broken pump, a cup of tea. This is where meaning resides, is it not? Not in the unfelt governance of 1,000,000,000 lives, but in the tending of one." He gave a slow nod. "It's where we find it. We make it from what we have." "Show me," she said, and it was not a command, but a request. So he did. For days that turned into cycles, he showed her the station. He showed her how to check the atmospheric processors, the rhythmic sighs the station's lungs. He taught her to prune the tomato plant, to pinch off the suckers so the fruit would grow. She, whose hands had once fashioned nebulae, learned the careful twist of the wrist. He showed her how to patch a hull breach with thermal polymer, how to calibrate the water recycler, how to coax the bees to make honey. Her immense power remained, but she let it sleep, focusing instead on the immediate, the tactile, the necessary. She changed. The radiant Empress, the being of light, began to wear a stained work jacket over her shift. She learned to smile at the first sprout of a seed she had planted herself. She once spent an entire 8-hour shift listening to the deep, harmonic hum of the station's core, calling it a more honest music than the cosmic song she had pursued. One day, as they were harvesting potatoes, she spoke. "The consensus will have detected my ship. Envoys will come. They will expect me to resume the throne. To be what I was. Eli straightened, a dirt-caked potato in his hand. Will you? She looked at her own hands, soil under the nails, a small scar from a misplaced tool. The being they seek is gone. She dissolved in the silence between galaxies. What is here is something else. They may not understand that. No, she agreed. But you do. The envoys came, as predicted. A flotilla of gleaming ships, like worried jewels, clustered outside the derelict station. The High Chancellor himself, a being of floating crystals, boarded with a full honor guard. He found them in the garden. He saw his Empress, his radiant sovereign, kneeling in the soil, placing a worm gently back into a compost bed. He saw a human standing beside her, handing her a trowel. Your eternal radiance. The Chancellor chimed, his crystals vibrating with shock and relief. The Empire rejoices. We have come to restore you to your throne. She stood, wiping her hands on her trousers. The Chancellor and his guard flinched at the simplicity of the gesture. There is nothing to restore, Chancellor, she said, her voice firm yet quiet, carrying the new gravity of small, real things. The throne is empty. Let it remain so. Governance shall continue as it has, by the laws we forged. I have abdicated. The Chancellor's light pulsed in frantic, confused patterns. Abdicated? To this? His focus turned to Eli, a gaze that could shatter asteroids. What has this creature done? He has done nothing but keep a promise, she said, stepping slightly, inconspicuously, between the Chancellor and the human. It was a protective gesture, witnessed by all. He has shown me that a universe is best understood not by ruling it, but by caring for a single piece of it. My reign was one of acquisition. My life now is one of cultivation. I will not be returning. The argument lasted for hours, but her will was immutable. She was no longer the blazing sun they remembered, but something denser, more grounded, and utterly unyielding. Finally, bewildered and defeated, the envoys departed in the renewed quiet. She and Eli stood in the garden, watching the flotilla jump away. They will not trouble you, she said. My final decree is that this station and its keeper are under my personal protection. It will be respected. Eli nodded. Thank you. No, she said, turning to him. The station's sun lamp cast a warm, dappled light through the grape leaves. It is I who must thank you. You waited. You held the thread. You gave me a place to return to that was not a palace, but a home. You reminded me that before one can appreciate the infinite, one must first value the finite. She picked a ripe, red tomato from the vine, its skin warm and perfect. She held it in her palm, a tiny, sun-fed universe. Eli smiled, a rare, deep creasing of his weathered face. The agreement is fulfilled, then. It is, she said. A new one begins. If you will have a fellow gardener. He looked at his domain, at the thriving, messy, beautiful life they had built together in this tiny corner of the void. He looked at the being who had remade herself from an empress into a person. The station, he said, could use the help.